Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome University of North Carolina Director of Athletics and NACDA President, Bubba Cunningham.
Great. Thank you very much, and good morning. As mentioned, my name is Bubba Cunningham. I'm the Director of Athletics at the University of North Carolina and NACDA President. And I want to thank everyone for being here today for another great session. I know we're starting a couple minutes late. We had another session run a little bit long and they're just now coming in, but I really appreciate everyone being here. Today's session is a topic that centers on student-athlete health, safety, and well-being, a topic that is incredibly important to all of us, and we have an outstanding panel this morning to help guide us through that discussion. We have Tommy Doles, student-athlete at Northwestern University, Roxanne Prichard, Scientific Director, the Center for College Sleep at the University of St. Thomas, Kim Record, Director of Athletics at UNC Greensboro, and Karen Tamburro, Title IX Coordinator, Office of Institutional Diversity and Equity at DePaul University. And now I would like to introduce Jack Ford, CBS 60 Minutes sports correspondent and PBS host, who will be moderating today's panel. Jack, it's all yours. Thank you for being here.
I also want to thank all of you for joining us this morning. The idea was for us to have a conversation. As you can see, we don't have a table up here. We're not presenting position papers. But the idea was for us to have a conversation about some areas that are certainly of importance to you. Part of the genesis of this, quite honestly, was Roxanne and I did a podcast for the NCAA. I host a series of podcasts for them, and we try to focus on issues that are important in the world of intercollegiate athletics. And we talked about, and we're going to replicate some of this conversation here, she and I talked about the notion of sleep and the value of sleep for student athletes and how there's a lack of understanding about what it means, the impact it could have, even the measurables. And so when I talked to Bob and Pat about doing an event, and they said we should do something that's focusing on health and well-being, and one of the first things we thought about is let's talk about that. Let's talk about sleep. Let's talk about mental health and well-being. Let's talk about the notion of sexual and relationship violence. So it's a pretty large agenda for a fairly tight period of time here. But we hope that through this conversation we'll provide something that will be helpful to you when you leave here today. Our thought is if we make you think a little bit about what we're talking about, and if we give some suggestions, that'll make this of value to you. So, that being said, let's jump into this if we can. And I'm going to start with that issue, that question of sleep and student athletes and the role of coaches and administrators in managing and monitoring that. I'm a former student athlete. I was a football player at Yale a long time ago. And the notion of even having a conversation about your sleep really wasn't in play at the time. So let's kick off with that if we can. So Roxanne, let me start with you, and your research and the work you've done has focused on this for a good period of time now. Let's say I'm a student athlete, right? And my coach comes to you and says, you know, I got a player, and Jack was really, when he first got back to campus here and we started, he was doing really well, but he seems to have lost his edge somehow. And I've talked with him, and there's no injuries. You know, we've checked, and he said, "Coach, I'm working as hard as I can here, but I know something is missing with him." What might intrigue you right now about these signs that we're talking about?
Sure. One of the first things I would ask is, of course, how he is sleeping. Sleep is fundamental to life, fundamental to performance, fundamental to success. So when your body isn't getting the sleep it needs, and the sleep it needs is when your body sleeps until it's done sleeping. For most young adults, that's over 8 hours. In fact, 8 to 10, and athletes need a little bit more sleep in season than not. So Olympic trainers tend to try to go for more 9 or 10 hours of sleep with the Olympic level athletes. And college students, football players are actually the worst, the lowest amount of sleep in season at under 6 hours a night. That's one place I could see a big room for improvement and competitive edge. So when we're not sleeping.
What would the conversation be?
With the coach or with
I'm now the student athlete. Coach has sent me in to see you. What's the conversation going to be? What are you going to ask me?
I'm going to ask, are you tired when you wake up?
And my answer to you is, aren't we all?
And my response would be no. In fact, you should wake up when you're fully rested, when you're done sleeping. And I would try to have knowledge of the student athletes that do get good sleep, and there's certainly those on campus, to use as an example. So our point guard, who led our team to the Final Four, doubled her three-point percentage when she started doing sleep extension to get to 8-9 hours.
I'm going to get to that in a minute, because I think that's fascinating, the ability to measure the impact. But at this early stage of the conversation, my response to you is, aren't we all tired?
And I would say,
I say to you, look, my friends are all tired. We all talk about the fact that, we just have so much going on. We just, something's got to give.
And I would say sleep is just like nutrition. How much thought do you put into your food, into your fuel? Do you monitor the color of your urine? Like, I know those charts are in the locker rooms, right? But how much attention do you give to sleep? And when you sleep well enough, you feel strong, you feel quick, you feel alert. And there are those student athletes that do that, and we just need to connect with them.
But
I'm not buying.
What about it? But my response is going to be to you, you know what? You're telling me to sleep more. Well, that's kind of like I'm giving up on stuff. I've got some jobs here. I'm here for a reason. I've got courses, and I'm taking a significantly hard schedule this year.
Right.
You know what? We have the potential to be really good on our team. So we're working hard. So you're telling me I should be sleeping more, which means I've got to take it away from something. I don't want to take it away from my academics, because I'm a junior, and I need my GPA high because I'm going to be applying to graduate school during the course of this summer. And you know what? I'm fighting for a position.
Yep. Okay. Here's what I would say to you.
So I'm looking at what I've got up here on my whiteboard for my schedule, and the thing on the bottom that I'm going to have to say, look, we're going to have to be short on this, is going to be sleep. Is that an attitude that you find in the part of student athletes?
That's certainly an attitude, and I think that comes from the false belief that sleep is nothing, that sleep is just a blank thing, rather than sleep is training your brain. So I tell students, when you are sleeping well, you actually increase your GPA. Students who sleep well have a GPA 0.14 points higher than students that are sleeping poorly. All right? When, and students relate to this, trying to study and their eyes move across the words, but the words don't get in their brain, if you had that experience, that's when you're just too tired for your brain to process information. So if you're well rested, it takes you half the time to do homework. Also increases your athletic performance. So sleep is an investment that pays off in performance academically and athletically.
What do you say to me, though, when I say, look, I understand what you're saying, but this is no different from when I was in high school. When I was in high school, I didn't get any sleep, and I did pretty well in high school. So why can't I continue to do pretty well?
Well, no student, the stakes are higher. It's tougher now, and I think everybody would agree with that. So we usually say, like, just give me a week. Just try a week of sleeping more. Usually that's enough for students to be like, oh, life is different now. And we were talking earlier.
Yeah.
Well, Tommy, let me bring you into the conversation. Does this sound familiar to you?
Yeah, and I can definitely speak to that, because time management is something that every student athlete kind of has to figure out coming in. And when you're figuring out time management, one of the things you need to do is say, what is non-negotiable? What do I have to do? And for me at first, that was my academics and my sport. And it wasn't sleep. Sleep was the thing that I could chip into if I ever needed extra time. But I'd say around sophomore year, I realized that I wasn't going to get by like that. I wasn't going to be able to thrive like that. So if you see sleep as one of those other non-negotiables that you have to prioritize in order to succeed in the other things that you're doing, I think it's to our immense benefit. It made me better in the classroom and on the football field. I had a hard time gaining weight, getting stronger. And I've seen that with teammates too. Either maybe they have a problem just prioritizing like I did, or some have sleep apnea or other disorders like that. And once they got the help they needed, that helped them succeed and finally thrive as a student athlete.
Kim, let me ask you, as an administrator, if the coach came to you and said, I got a player and I'm just trying to figure out why he's not performing at the level he was earlier and what I expected of him, would this notion of let's inquire into sleep habits be something that now administrators are becoming more aware of and more inclined to say to their coaches and their support staff, maybe we've got to do something institutionally here?
Well, I think it's one of probably a list of 10 that we would pull out and say, are they sleeping well? Are they eating well? Is there something going on academically with them? What is the underlying cause? Because students do come in to athletic directors too and say, I'm just tired. And it's easy to say, well, I'm tired too. You're too young to be tired. Are you sleeping? And it goes back to choices, as you said. You know, college is not just about, in students' minds, their academics, obviously priority. Athletics, their priority. Where do they fit in that other time to do all of the other things that are part of being in college? And so it's not an easy thing. But I also tell them that we all have 24 hours in a day, and getting enough sleep and eating right are two things that will make them better down the road. And so it's habits. It's time management and how do you create better habits.
Tommy, let me come back to you again, because the notion of nutrition has moved up high on the list. Indeed, there are some folks that would suggest that now in the recruiting process, the ability to say to a prospective student athlete, come take a look at what we provide in terms of nutrition for our athletes and see how impressive it is and how we're focusing on it. But is the idea of sleep ever talked about?
I think increasingly more so. So I went through the recruiting process about 5 years back now. I'm starting to feel a little bit old, but I think that back then they were starting to talk about nutrition, but sleep and sleep studies is something that started happening my freshman year, and now it's a priority. That's what the athletic trainers are talking to us about. So I think we're seeing a trend towards seeing that being more valued, and I think that's to our benefit.
Roxanne, if we have this conversation, you and I, and you think right away that this lack of sleep could very easily be what is creating this problem for me. And I say to you, okay, I think I'm just like everybody else, and that we're not getting the amount of sleep. But let me ask you this, and what should I be doing? You have some sort of tips for me that could help me.
Yeah, we have many tips. So one, we want students to think about, well, coaches and administrators and trainers, and coaches aren't getting enough sleep out there too. So football players are the worst, or football coaches get the least amount of sleep of any collegiate sport. But we want to think about the quantity, the consistency, and the quality. So the first thing is, how much sleep are you getting? If you feel tired, if your players are zonked out on the bus and on planes, they're not getting enough sleep. Consistency, so your body operates under a circadian rhythm. About 5 to 10% of all the genes in our body are under a circadian rhythm. And if you get like a different schedule for the weekend versus the weekday, your basic protein expression is off for things like hormone balance, eating, muscle repair, muscle recovery. So thinking about keeping the same schedule. So we at St. Thomas work with our athletic teams to look at their whole training schedule and practice schedule and travel schedule to maximize that consistency in sleep. Third thing is the quality. So you mentioned sleep apnea. A lot of players have sleep apnea, just especially if you have a lot of neck muscles, it's hard to breathe. We want to make sure that we're screening for the students that have mental disorders that might be impacting their sleep. We want to make sure the players that have restless legs, especially women, cross-country athletes, anybody who's risk for low iron has higher rates of restless legs. So we want to get those sleep things taking care of their disorders, and look about how can we maximize the sleep environment. Are the residence halls good for sleeping? Are they too noisy? Are they too hot? Are they too loud? What can we do with blackout shades, with fans, with lavender mists, with gravity blankets? What can we do to make a better sleep environment?
You mentioned the sleep environment, residence halls. They're not, the reality is, and all of us who were college students remember, they're not really designed to enhance your sleep.
They could be.
Culture, they could be. But the culture of being a college student, I think when you're talking about what is it that we're designing this experience for, well, getting more sleep is probably pretty low on the list. So how then, if you say this to me and I say, all right, fine, I live in a dormitory structure with there are some student athletes, but a lot of people who aren't student athletes, a lot of people who have different schedules. You know, I have a roommate who's pre-med who has labs at really early in the morning. So understanding that you can't control everything about your environment, what can you suggest that I do, or what can you suggest that the administration perhaps can do to provide a better opportunity for us to enhance our sleep?
Well, we've actually developed the College Sleep Environmental Scan, which over 80 colleges have taken, which is a point-by-point assessment of things that you can do. Some of them are big picture, like in the residence halls, can you change the lights automatically so if you get up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, you don't have big bright lights in the hallways. Some of them are easy fixes, like screening for sleep on the pre-performance exam for athletes, or when do professors make their homework due? So on the online platform, many people will just check end of the day, which pretty much is midnight, which guarantees you do your other homework after that deadline. So thinking strategically at the university level, what can you do with policies, programming, procedures to improve the sleep environment? We suggest, as students move in with their roommates, facilitating a conversation about sleep, like what are our guaranteed quiet hours? How many times are you allowed to hit snooze? Like these are awkward conversations that has a big impact.
But how do you do it? I'll give you an illustration. My son was a lacrosse player at Yale. And his freshman year, there were 4 of them, 2 bedrooms and a common room, and in his bedroom was a fellow who had just strange circadian rhythms. And he said to my son from the very beginning, you know, I study sort of from 2 in the morning till 6 in the morning. And then I go to sleep, and then I get up and I go to some classes, and it's just the way he did it. Now, my son was a political science major and had some serious courses, but also he's a lacrosse player, Division I lacrosse player. That's a serious conflict. So if I'm having this conversation, let's make believe I'm my son, and I say to you, I'm having a problem because when I'm trying to go to sleep, he's working. And you know what? It's his room too.
And that's where that conversation about in-room quiet hours can be really important. There are other places he can study that's not in the room. We also give out the eye mask and the earplugs, and that can help a little bit, but I think if you have a college culture that says sleep is important to your mental health, sleep is important to your wellness, these conversations are important.
Let me come back to something that you and I talked about when we did the podcast, and I found absolutely fascinating. Look, the notion of sleep is important and you need it is, we've heard that since we were toddlers and our parents told us, you got to go to sleep, you need to sleep. But you have talked about, and you mentioned now, GPA enhancement. And I think you had talked about a situation where people were looking at the impact on better sleep on things such as free throw percentages. Talk about that a little bit.
Yep, so that was a fantastic study by Sherry Ma, who works closely with, okay, don't be mad at me, Golden State Warriors, that's the basketball team, right?
That's good.
That just won? Okay.
And that was,
Want to make sure they're not calling in the Cavs, yes.
That was a really good release,
yes,
by the way.
Thank
Steph
you.
Curry, Steph Curry would be proud.
Thanks. Yeah, I watch soccer. So. Okay, so she works very closely with the professional teams. She worked with Stanford. The Stanford men's basketball study asked that those players get 9 hours of sleep a night. So they did whatever they needed to. They did a sleep extension study in season for 8 weeks. That's the season they went 30-2. Their free throw percent went up about 15%. Their court and a half sprint dropped 0.75 seconds. Their team bonding went up. They performed beautifully. And so that has been kind of the gold standard of what happens if you really prioritize sleep extension in your program. So swimmers are 17% faster on off the starting block when they get enough sleep.
So Kim, as an administrator, you hear these numbers, you hear these enhanced performances, and yet you are in the midst of a college culture. You can't go up to your professor and say, you know what, I had a hard practice yesterday, so I kind of needed to sleep through this course. And that's, we don't want that. Our student athletes want to get the best of everything. I had somebody interesting, I was talking to a group of student athlete representatives from the Colonial Athletic Association last week. And one of the young women said something great. She said, you know what, we're all wired differently. We were having a conversation. My daughter was a lacrosse player at Yale also. She's now a cancer surgeon. So she had to she had a lot of stuff going on. And she had mentioned that one time, said, you know what, we're wired differently. Right? We're designed to do all of these things, which was one of the great values of intercollegiate athletics, that we are helping people to develop who have the capacity to do so much with their lives. But institutionally, how then are we able to incorporate? What would you say to your coaches? What would you say to your trainers that could incorporate some of the things that Roxanne is telling us about? Because if you look at the numbers and you look at the results of these tests, essentially it becomes a no-brainer. It's like, why wouldn't we do this? But I guess the better question becomes, well then how do we as administrators do this?
Well, I think the research, I'm going to go back and read some of this. If any of our teams could increase that percentage. I think what's difficult about that, it's not that sleep isn't important, obviously. I had a son, student athlete, same kind of thing. He didn't get enough sleep. There was always a good excuse for that of particularly in intercollegiate athletics, on college campuses, there are bright, wonderful students who have capacity and would say that they are wired differently. A music major, a biologist, 9 times out of 10, they probably aren't getting enough sleep either. I think for us in intercollegiate athletics, certainly we want to provide every opportunity for student athletes to be successful in whatever they want to do. Our job is to know what those things are, put those out there for our students. We can't force them to do that. And depending on your institution, where they are as it relates to that culture of health and wellness, where the focus is, whether it's the mental health, it's all interrelated. But at the end of the day, all of us or any of us who have children, you can tell them these things are good for you. And sometimes it takes time. I think you said you didn't sleep a whole lot your freshman year?
That's right.
You probably slept more your sophomore year, but not 9 hours.
How are you doing now, Tommy? How about now?
Put you on the spot.
As a sort of rising senior kind of thing, are you get more sleep now, less sleep now, about the same?
Slept 8 hours last night. I'm getting more, I think. And
By a conscious choice on your part, or is it just that your schedule is allowing more for it?
a little bit of both. I think I've gotten better at a few things throughout college, but being disciplined with my time and understanding what I have capacity for, that's something that I've definitely grown in. I've learned that sometimes I need to say no to opportunities that might come by, and that's difficult, but
I would think difficult, especially as a freshman. Coming in first year, it's, you know, your eyes are bright. I'm a college student. I'm an athlete. You know, this is we talk about it as the greatest period of your life, to be able to engage in things that you had never engaged in before. You know, I remember, you know, signing up for courses. I'm a freshman at Yale. I came from a little tiny public high school in the Jersey Shore. I was raised by a single mother. I show up as a scholarship student at Yale, and I think, I'm at Yale, I should take a Greek classics course. And I walked in, and there were about 8 students there, and the professor says, now, how many of you already read the Iliad and the Odyssey? 7 hands go up, not mine. And I thought, well, maybe this is not one of the experiences I need right away as a freshman. I can grow into this. So I would think, and Roxanne, I'll ask you to do this, are we talking here that we need to shift cultures to some effect? And one of the things I'll throw out here, and it's not that you can change it, but I don't know about all you, my children started high school at 7:20 in the morning. Every study I've ever seen said that teenagers don't function at that hour. They needed more sleep, and yet institutionally and culturally, and I'm sure it goes back to the times when we were agricultural communities, but how do we change? Is that part of the problem of the culture? That kids are coming out of high school sleep deprived, so they're thinking, well, why should it be any different now that I'm a college student?
Yeah, and then that's something I am working with. So high school students and teens have a biological shift. This happens in every culture, even every mammalian species, where during puberty it's just they shift later in the night, so it's harder to wake up early. And freshmen are the worst. So you get to be a little bit more of a morning person by the time you're a senior. But freshmen, who are often stuck with like the 8:30 classes or the 7:30 labs, because those are the only ones left, really struggle with this. So I would, in college, so several states, California is one of them, have enacted measures, Rhode Island, so that you don't start high school before 8:30. But what we're finding is that a generation of college students who are so exhausted, they don't even know what it's like not to feel perpetually exhausted. They don't know what it's like to sleep till you're done sleeping for every day of a week. And when that happens, it's really a mental health crisis. When you're not getting enough sleep, your body thinks it's an emergency, so it shifts into flight or fight mode. It shifts into the sympathetic nervous system, so your heart beats higher, you're easier to get overwhelmed, you're easier to get anxious and depressed. And this is what people are living with.
Mm-hmm. A couple other things that we want to talk about here. So let me shift our focus a bit, because I think we've touched base on several of the significant aspects of the notion of sleep and how the culture within the universities, the colleges can change to reflect what needs to be done here. But there's some other things we want to talk about. So let's assume, and Kim, let's assume that one of your coaches comes to you and says, again, as before, I've got one of my student athletes and just, there's something wrong. I don't know what it is, but there's something wrong. He's just not performing at the level he used to. And I've talked with him, but he says, Coach, everything's fine. I'm good. Everything's fine. But clearly he isn't. What sort of advice can you give to your coach at this point as to what the next steps should be for them in terms of dealing with what they clearly perceive to be a problem?
Well, I think it's, again, you go back to asking the questions of what are they seeing or what do they know about what's going on in that student's life outside of the sport. And so having resources, if it's mental health related, making sure that one of the things we were talking about, coaches are not psychologists. Many of them are not. Maybe they think they are sometimes. So teaching coaches to refer, and that sometimes student athletes are not going to tell their coach anything that would lead them to think that they may not play, all of those things. So I think having an environment within your department that, yes, a coach can come in and then it's a referral. So someone else might reach out to that student
So in this scenario, let's say the coach sits me down and says, Jack, you're okay. You seem to be off. You don't seem to be practicing as well. Is there something wrong? And my response is, Coach, I'm good. I'm good. Because, look, as student athletes, we don't want to be perceived to be weak in some fashion, that there's something wrong with us, that we're not capable of performing at the level that we want to perform at. Right? So the coach says to you now, as the athletic director, I've talked to him and he says he's fine. I know he's not. So now what do you suggest that your coach do, or what you, as the athletic director, do to essentially confront me about what is perceived to be a problem?
Well, I guess first I would not use the word confront.
Okay.
And I think that many programs now do give coaches the tools that if the answer is fine, we're all fine. I'm fine. To be able to ask some specific questions on and or sharing with that student, hey, I get it. If you don't want to talk to me, there are these resources that you can. And whether that comes directly to the athletic director and I have a conversation with the student, you have the athletic trainers are a first place that if you really want to know something that's going on, for whatever reason, student athletes feel very comfortable with that, their academic support person. There are many ways, and the other is particularly students are more willing, I think, than when we were in college to say, I'm depressed, or I'm anxious, or I'm fill in the blank. That in the SAC, National SAC has done a really good job of this, of there's not a stigma to saying, there's something going on with me and I don't know how to deal with it. And so part of it as administrators and as coaches being willing to say, hey, I've felt that way too, or these are issues and opportunities to deal with and talk about. So again, a lot of it is about referral. And when I say referral, I don't mean go across campus and we don't care about you. Mm-hmm. It's about just having those very authentic conversations. And sometimes it's not the head coach, it's the assistant coach.
How about this? How about a teammate? How about Tommy and I are teammates on the football team? And you know Tommy just through his work on the community, and you know that we're pretty good friends. Would you or suggest one of your coaches go to Tommy and say, something wrong with Jack? Are you seeing anything there? Is that okay to do that, to go to him and say?
I think you have to be careful in doing that.
But wouldn't that be your best, perhaps other than me? Would that not be the best source of information? Get a friend, somebody who's with him multiple hours during the day?
You might, but I think that also then puts that student, depending on what's going on with the student, puts that teammate in a situation where, yes, they may know exactly what's going on. And you want them to come forward, but they don't want to rat on their teammate. They want to try to help them. And so we do as much work working with teams and teammates to talk about, again, that word refer is sort of the new word that we use, so that teammates can come forward. So you use a different example. Tommy doesn't come forward. Mm-hmm. Actually, Jane comes forward and says, hey, you need to be aware that there's something going on, and I don't know how to deal with that. Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, they shouldn't have to deal with it. The coming forward part then gives us an opportunity to bring Tommy in and say, hey, we're aware, people are worried about you. Mm-hmm. And at some point, depending on the level of what that issue might be, you have a responsibility as an administrator or as a coach to provide that resource. If at a minimum one time, you can't force a student to go get help, but the obligation that we have to identify it and then make sure that we give those resources or have the opportunity is very important, because the last thing you want is something being very seriously wrong and not having followed up on it.
Tommy, how about that? How about you and I are teammates, and we're friends, and you can tell that there's just something that's off right now, that somehow I've changed.
Yeah.
All right? Are you going to ask me about it? Would we, and we're pretty good friends.
Yeah, I think this exact conversation is one of the reasons that destigmatizing is so important, and I'm really proud of the efforts that National SAC has done to work towards destigmatizing mental health, because I think in the past we used to see caring for your mental health and your mental toughness as some mutually exclusive things, but if we're seeing those as complementary now, wherein your resilience as a student athlete is going to be one of the things that makes you mentally tough, and you need to be caring for your mental health to have that, then that's why, if it's destigmatized, and I know that it's important not only because I care for you as my teammate, but also because it's a competitive advantage for you to be at your best mentally. If we have it destigmatized, that's why we need to be able to have this conversation.
But how about, let's say we have the conversation, and I say to you, look, man, I appreciate you asking, but I'm good. I'm fine. And it's the second time you asked me, and you really don't need to ask me again. I'm okay. I'm good. You know I'm not. Or you know at least I'm different than what I've been as long as you've known me before. What do you do next? Do you go talk to the coach and say, I don't know what it is, but Jack's having some problems? Would you do that?
I think before I talk to the coach, I'd like to have a sports psychologist or athletic trainer that I could go to talk to. And that's one of the reasons I think it's important to have a sports psychologist who's very present with your team and who you can trust and get to know. At Northwestern, we have Dr. Julie Sutcliffe, and we meet with her as a team on a bi-weekly basis. And as that happens and she becomes more familiar and we can trust her, maybe she's someone who I could catch after practice and say, hey, quick question for you. My teammate is showing XYZ, and I just don't think he's himself. Do you think that could be something? Do you think you should talk to him or I should talk to him? What should I do next? Because as we've said, we aren't experts as student athletes. Even if I've taken Psych 101, there's still a need for.
If you took 201, you're an expert.
Then I would be.
then you're good. 101, still a little shaky.
Fortunately, I'm political science, but if I have
political science means you're an expert in everything.
Hey, there you go.
Right? I was a political science major. Yeah. I can say that. So what, again, Kim, let me come back to you as an administrator. What do you want your student athletes to be doing in a situation like this?
You want to have a culture that they are comfortable in coming forward or having someone that they can go to. At the beginning of the year, I'm sure every athletic program sits with each individual team. You talk about the individuals that they can go to if they don't feel comfortable talking to a coach. And then again, you have to monitor and be cognizant of what's going on. So I would want a student athlete to be able to come forward. And again, if athletic trainer or sports psychologist, one of the things that I think we have to remember in terms of the gamut from intercollegiate programs from Division I to Division III, NAIA, we all have different types of resources. Some are within your program, and having a sports psychologist on staff is terrific. Some have great collaborations with on-campus health professionals. I think that part of the challenge overall, this is not a silo, that these types of issues are on college campuses and there are not enough resources for students in general. So, our group that we have to ensure gets the help that they need. It's important that it goes back to that culture and building that culture of come forward and we can talk about it. And then making sure that who do we know that is connected to the team that is that person that they go to. And we all have them on our within our department. But that's important. You want them to come forward, but you also don't want them to feel responsible as it relates to particularly if it's someone that you live with, and you know that if they're spending hours in the restroom and you're looking at whether bulimia or eating disorders are the types of things that you see a lot of times, that they'll come forward and say, we know this isn't right, but she won't listen to us, and they're doing the right thing. Now, their teammate may be angry with them, may not speak to them again, all of the things that when you're 18 to 22 you say and do, but they're doing the right thing by not trying to fix it themselves.
But Tommy, I'll come to you again. Would the fact that you would be doing the right thing, so there's an expression that says that just because it's the right thing doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing for you to do at that moment. And this becomes difficult. Is it the right thing to go to people about me, your friend? Sure. But if I say to you, look, you got to stop asking me this. I'm good. I don't want you to don't go talking to coach, don't go talking to anybody else, the trainers, about it, because I don't want people to start looking at me differently, saying there's something wrong with him. I'm fighting hard. I'm trying to earn a position here. You know, I'm working on my classes. There's a lot going on. You know, man, I appreciate it. Don't talk to anybody about it. Now what do you do?
Well, you're in a tough spot, and this is something that
I'm putting you in a tough spot now.
I'm in a tough spot. I think this is one that takes wisdom because there's no clear answer. I think if you care enough about that person, you have the relationship, and you say, yeah, I am my brother's keeper. I have to do everything I can to look out for him. You could try convincing him that this is going to be something that might help him be better at his sport. And if he still shuts you down, that's an even tougher spot. But I think that's one of the reasons it's important to have confidential sources that you can talk to, a stepping stone of someone to talk to before you go right to a coach or someone making that decision. And that's why the sports psychologist, I think, is big for us. And one other thing I'd like to touch on, because I think it's a really important part of this whole mental health and wellness issue that's not really discussed as much, is that often I see people whose identity gets so wrapped up in their sport, and that's bound to fail at some point, whether it's through retirement, injury, or loss. And if they don't have a place to go to ask, who am I, where does my value come from, I think you're going to be missing a piece. We care about our mental, our physical well-being, but I think our spiritual well-being too is something that is maybe tough to discuss, and maybe it's not going to be provided by the administrators in this room or by our institutions, but I think we should at least be open to the people who can and are able to provide that. So, example, Athletes in Action is a non-denominational ministry that has been really important for me in understanding who I am and asking some of the bigger questions. So I think that's a part that might get left out sometimes, but I think is really important for our wellness.
Let me change this up a little bit. And Karen, this brings you into this conversation here. Let's say, Kim, you have one of your student athletes who's a member of the women's tennis team, makes an appointment to come in and see you, sits down and says, I don't know if this is the right thing for me to do or not, but one of my teammates, who's also my roommate, there's something going on here. And it goes back to about a week or so ago. She came in late at night after a date, and she's disheveled, and she's crying, and I say, are you okay? What happened? She said, no, I don't want to talk about it, I don't want to talk about it. And since that time, she is not herself. There's just some, she's withdrawn, she won't talk. Every once in a while I catch her and sitting in the corner and she's starting to cry. You know, at practice, she's barely there, all right? So this is the conversation I'm having with you. Karen, what do you then want Kim to do, given your experience and what you do, what should she be doing now with this conversation? First of all, should she be having this conversation where I'm telling her what's going on and the problems that my roommate is having?
Absolutely.
All right.
So the roommate has, or the student has entrusted Kim with this information. Kim's first response should be to, outside of responding empathetically to the student who's dealing with a really difficult issue, she's dealing with a roommate that perhaps experienced some trauma, Kim should refer the matter to me. So anytime that there's an issue regarding sex discrimination, sexual harassment, sexual and relationship violence, that needs to be reported to the Title IX coordinator to ensure that there's an appropriate response. And that response can take a number of different forms. And I know that there are a number of you out there who think that Title IX is simply this compliance-based position, following rules and doing investigations, but a huge portion of what I do is ensuring that students who are impacted by trauma are able to access support and resources, make sure that they're referred to individuals that can help them so that they can continue their education. So there are two people that are impacted by this right now. It's the individual that came to Kim, and it's the roommate who may be suffering trauma. So what we know is that a lot of times somebody who's experienced trauma won't go and tell an administrator. They tell their friend. So we make sure that the friend knows resources that are available so that she can share it with her friend.
And how do we encourage the friend? Because as you said, what we know is, and it's trauma in a lot of areas, people are not as amenable to talking about. How do we encourage the friends, the teammates, to come to you, or maybe to Kim first and then to you, because it goes back to the scenario that Tommy and I were acting out before. Because if I, as a roommate, talk with her, and I'm trying to get her to talk with me, and she says, I just don't want to talk about it. And I don't want you to talk about it to anybody else, right? And that's not an unusual scenario, correct?
No.
So how do we then, as administrators, and how do we deal with our coaches to get them to know it's not just okay to talk, we need you to talk, and not to get the friends to be willing to run the risk of the impact on their friendship to come forward? What do we say to them?
So there's a number of things that a university can do to promote reporting, but I don't even like the term reporting because it sounds like you're telling on somebody. But what you want to do is promote this discussion. And to do that, there's a number of things that a university can do. One is to make sure that students are aware of resources that are available on campus, including confidential resources, because that's really, really important. A lot of times people don't want to go to an administrator and share perhaps the most difficult thing that they've ever experienced. A confidential resource that can help them navigate different avenues for moving forward is really, really important. You can do bystander intervention. At DePaul University, we do bystander intervention. It's a 3-hour training for all incoming athletes so that they know that it's okay to intervene when they see that something's wrong with one of their friends or teammates, that it's okay to ask questions, and that they know where the resources are on campus to report or to share that information. The other thing is to promote just a notion that we're all in this together. It's a community, and that reporting doesn't take necessarily a person down a road of investigation or publicizing what happened, but it's really sharing this information is designed to make sure that people are connected to supports and resources so that they can continue their education, continue with their access to all the programs and opportunities available at an educational institution.
Is then, in terms of what you would be advising Kim to do, I mean, your first instinct may well be, as an administrator, as an athletic director, let me bring my coach in and see if they've seen these same symptoms that the teammate/roommate has told me about. Is that something that they should be doing right away?
I would not advise that.
No. But is that an instinct that you would have? I mean, usually if you have a student athlete who's having a problem, isn't one of the first places you go to talk to your coach?
Yes, that's your first instinct. And but I think many of us, we were talking about this over the last, 5 to 10 years as it relates to particularly sexual misconduct, which can range from language to a serious rape. We have a responsibility, again, through the Clery Act, to immediately report that. And so there are two issues. Intercollegiate athletics, we do so many wonderful things. Yet there have been times where I think every coach and every administrator is a fixer. We fix things. We fix it, we listen, we think we know all the answers, and we don't. And so, no, you don't bring a coach in. You don't judge the student. If it's a friend, you are empathetic, and then you share what your process is on your campus. And so our example is, thank you for sharing this information. It would be terrific if your roommate would come in and talk to us about this. I am going to share this information with our Title IX coordinator. And
what do you do if the roommate says to you, no, you can't do that? Because you know what, this is going to destroy we're friends, and I'm just she asked me not to talk to anybody. But I know how important her athletics are, and my first thought was, I'll go see you. You'll help me with this. But what you're telling me is, you're essentially going to betray me, and by going to some official someplace, and of course, somebody's going to want to talk to her, and it's going to come right back to me, and you know what? That's ruined our friendship.
Well, those are situations where you tell young people there are consequences for every action. There are very few things, I think, as administrators, when we sit down with students and say, I'll listen to anything, everything that you tell me can be confidential. There are two caveats to that. NCAA compliance is one, and the other would be something that would be related to Title IX. And it does not mean that the student, once they that goes through, and we say a process, it actually goes to someone like you. Mm-hmm. It can be a conversation. And it doesn't mean that the roommate is ever necessarily identified mm-hmm. as the source of the information. And those are hard conversations.
Karen, let me ask you that. Suppose that the roommate, teammate, goes to the coach, not the athletic director, goes to the coach and says, look, I've got to tell you this, but this has to stay between us. Mm-hmm. Because I want to preserve this relationship, this friendship, but I'm so concerned about her, I think something happened. And she won't talk. Won't talk to me, won't talk to anybody else. But I'm certain something, just the evidence when she came in, something happened here. So I want to talk to you as a coach, but you have to promise me you're not going to do anything, go to anybody else. Maybe you can figure out a way to talk with her or at least deal with her at practice, but you got to promise me you're not going to go to anybody else. How does the coach handle that?
Well, the coach would say, I'm sorry, there's this law that requires that I report anything regarding...
And that might sound good to us as adults, but to an 18-year-old who's looking at a sacrificing a friendship because she wants to do the right thing by her friend, how do we convince her that it's okay to do that?
At the ground level, when those student athletes are coming in, it's really important that they know who the Title IX coordinator is, that they see that face, that they know that it's a good person to work with, she's friendly and approachable, super nice, and that she's here to help. That's really the true purpose of the job. She's here to help. She's here to access, give you support and resources, so that the notion of going to the Title IX coordinator is no longer a frightening thing. Oh, she's just going to go talk to Karen. I met Karen. She was at our orientation session. She's funny and really nice and approachable. That's what you want to do. So at the get-go, your student athletes have to know who the Title IX coordinator is, not to fear the process, not to fear that administrator, and just know that they're here to help.
And how much of this comes back, and you touched on this before, comes back to at the very beginning of the student athlete's college experience. How important, how valuable is it for you or someone similar to you to have these conversations with the student athletes when they're first showing up on campus?
It's crucial. I work very closely with our athletic department. We do in-depth trainings every fall with our athletes, and we do trainings throughout the year so that they see my face, so that they know who I am, know people from my office. We work closely with another office, the Office of Health Promotion and Wellness, so that they know who the confidential resources are. It's very important. So that's not a stigma, it's not a problem. They know who we are.
How do we, Tommy, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, touching on the stigma, and I think the idea of culture is so important here again, and that's something I'd like to speak to as a college football player. Just first it breaks my heart anytime anyone is treated with less than the dignity that they deserve as a human being, especially when it's some abuse of a power differential. And power is something that we have as college football players, as student athletes. We have this platform, this influence that we can use to create a positive culture where that's not okay. So when college athletes are the ones purveying that, doing that violence, it sets us back so far. It sets a terrible example for the next generation who looks up to us. And by far most importantly, it's hurting these victims. And I think that one of the most valuable trainings that we've had on our football team, as good as modules are, is hearing stories of these brave survivors who have stepped forward and shared the impact that that experience has on them. And I think that's really convicted a lot of guys on our football team to be the ones that are going to bring forward a positive culture. And that's why this campaign that the NCAA, National SAC, It's on Us, is so real, because we're the ones who are creating this culture, we're the ones who are influencing it, and I really do believe that ultimately it's on us to enforce that and to make this a better place.
Well, the clock, we should. The clock up here is telling me that we have just about run out of time, and I think there's probably no better time and no better way to wrap this up than with those last comments by Tommy. Our hope was, in the hour or so we had, to touch base on several significant issues, things that clearly are on your mind and that you deal with on a daily basis, and to get you to think about them. There's an expression that we've used on our PBS shows when we have these kinds of conversations. We say our purpose is not to tell people what to do, but it's to make the agony of decision making so intense you escape only by thinking. And I think by thinking out loud here today, our panelists perhaps have helped all of you to think about all of these issues. So I'd like you all to give a wonderful round of applause to our four guests for all of this. And I want to thank you all for joining us. I'm going to turn it back over to Bubba.
Great. Jack, thank you so much for moderating that panel. Really appreciate the great conversation. Kim, Karen, Roxanne, absolutely outstanding. Tommy, if you want to speak to any one of our students or any of our teams, you're more than welcome. You're absolutely outstanding. Thanks so much for being here. All of you, I encourage you to use your app that's on the phone. I think NACDA did an incredible job with the app this year. We have general sessions coming on throughout the rest of the day, and then I encourage you to get to the Corbett Luncheon, and that starts at 12:45. Thanks for being here, and have a great day.